Okay, we're on.
Cool. Okay, so the items we got today on the agenda. First one up is limiting push access to the LTS staging branches to the backport team. This is something we discussed in the backport team meeting, which I think everyone here was in, except maybe James, last week. So I guess Miles?
Yeah, so the quick TLDR on this. We have these staging branches, and knowing that these staging branches are pristine is the way in which we can kind of, cut the releases really quickly without having to re-audit everything. So a solution that we came up with as far as like one way to know that they're pristine is essentially to like lock the branch to a backporting group. Originally, this wasn't something I had considered doing when I was the only one doing this work, but I think if we have a group of 5 or 6 people who, have credentials to be able to do this, I think that it would be fine. We could obviously go a step further and, give permissions to all of the CTC. But the high level idea here is to just, keep the branches in a place where we know it's only a handful of people who are going to be touching them. We kind of get this a little bit with signed commits. And I highly suggest that everyone turns that on and get config, and I can show them how to if they don't have it done yet. But aside from that, the high level idea was just maintaining the pristine level. And to make sure that there's no confusion here, pristine does not mean that these are a source of truth. We still can rebase the history on 6x at any time. You can force push, although I've been doing force with least now to avoid pushing over other things that have been backported that I don't have on my own branch. But the highest level thing here is just that the only people who are touching that branch are people who are involved in backporting or releases. I do not believe that this should be the case for 7x staging, but we may want to discuss whether or not that should be limited to releasers or not, for similar reasons, and to potentially avoid having weird differences between staging branches. Anyone have any thoughts?
I mean, it seems easy enough to enable for 6 and 4 now, and then, for example, for 7, we can see if that works, then why not? I certainly don't see any reason. I've never wanted to push to v6 or v4 without, except doing backporting. And in fact, it'd be good to know that I couldn't accidentally push to it when I was trying to create a backport PR. So yeah, makes sense to me.
Yeah, how many people, I think at one point, there's a few that I've pushed to the backport stages, but mostly because I think I was asked to do that. Mm-hmm. Do we do that very often, or?
Generally, people don't, but I think, and especially in light of some, questions and things coming up lately, I think being explicit about these things is better than, relying on things that are not explicit and undocumented.
No, I was more going from the other perspective. Like, if we routinely ask people to do it, then it might cause us more work if there was a limited number. But if we don't and don't really want people to, then yeah, we should just say you can't. And if you can make it even better so you can't, that's the way to go.
So the number of actual backport commits that we have are like fairly low, and it's manageable. Like generally they can all be managed in like less than an hour when you're putting together the release. And as far as like people cherry picking their own stuff, I actually personally would not like people doing that, especially if they're cherry picking stuff that's not yet ready for release or shouldn't be in an LTS release yet.
Yeah, makes sense to me. Looking at it kind of looks like there's most people who've commented agree as well.
Yeah, I think at this point it's a good idea. I definitely, given that Miles has done the overwhelming majority of the backporting and everything, I tend to defer to his judgment on it. If he's saying it's a good idea, then I have to agree.
Pretty much unanimous.
Yeah, so I think that this should be then floated to the CTC, is my opinion. But I'm open to the group as far as whether or not that's a CTC fault to sign off on or not.
I think at the very least, marking it CTC review and giving it a couple of days to see if anyone on the CTC objects.
Okay.
Yeah, that sounds like a good way to do it.
There isn't a CTC review tag right now on LTS. I'll create that label and then I'll app the CTC.
Cool. So I think that's pretty much done, carried here, and we'll go on to the CTC. So moving on to the next one, again, should be quite an easy one. We want to bring forward the end of Node 8 LTS support to coincide with when that OpenSSL goes out of service, which is what we did for 0.12. Basically, does anyone disagree?
Does this mean we're shortening it?
Yes.
By how much?
I think it's 3 months.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it's the same as we had to do the last
yeah.
time.
Instead of
Sounds
ending
fine.
in April, it would end in December 31st.
Yep.
Sounds fine to me.
Okay, cool. Didn't expect a lot of thing on that. So I'll put a comment in there saying that that's.
So
And I think you note the schedule was already updated, so there's nothing to do.
Yes, there's nothing to do except confirm that no one has any issues with it, basically.
So quick question before we move forward with this. What is the next version of OpenSSL that is has a long-term support from OpenSSL?
I think it moves up to 1.1. It might even move up to 1.2.
I believe it's 1.2. Tageki's been and has been looking at it. I'm not sure how close we are to actually getting that PR landed.
Yeah.
So question for you quickly regarding that. So how far are we from upgrading OpenSSL? Is that not something that could potentially be done in time for the V8 release to avoid having to do this conflict?
I think that was already part of the discussion, and the decision was we should wait and do it in the next current.
Yeah, so if you look at the linked, if you look at the LTS issue, there's a linked node PR, which is to update to node to OpenSSL 1.1. And there's quite a lot of discussion in that, but basically I think some of it is that Shigeki and Indutni both said that they would be pro keeping sticking with 102 because the new one they weren't sure it was quite ready enough, and it's quite a big change.
It also doesn't have FIP certification, so you would lose.
Yeah. Now,
Yeah,
is FIP certification something that's in the pipeline for that, or is that like, are we gonna have to figure that out in like 6 months or 12 months?
Well, OpenSSL is, I believe that they announced they are looking at getting that certification done. It takes a while, but at least it pushes it out, at least a year in terms of, it gives them a year to get it done, as opposed to now we would just have no option.
Yeah, so, I mean, I without a doubt respect Shigeki and Fedora's opinion here. I'm more just thinking timeline out now. Like, is this something that we're going to have fixed, or is this something that we should be starting to break ground on now of looking at like maybe replacing OpenSSL with another vendor's, like another option? If like this is not something that's going to.
I don't know that any of the other, like in terms of FIPS, I don't know that any of the other vendors have certification either. So.
Okay.
But yeah, I think that it's. Yeah, I think they're, at least as far as I know. Now, it's worth looking at the other ones to see if they do. OpenSSL is the closest is the most likely open source one to actually get it.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, and Shigeki has been doing work. So I think he's got a branch. He's been doing experiments so that when they think it's ready, we're probably as good as we can be to go.
It sounds good to me. I think that it would be good. Like the only thing that I'm slightly concerned about here, although like I mean it's tangential, so let's table it after this. But my concern is that since security working group is more of like a reactional thing, and it's not necessarily directly on the CTC's agenda. I'm not sure if we need to spin up a working group to handle this, or if it's something that we should like. I just feel like we need to be more proactive about like making a timeline of this stuff and making sure that by the time 10 comes around, we have something, and if not, we have like an alternative strategy. Because I could just see this like no one thinking about it for the next 6 to 9 months.
Yeah, we should go. I mean, I think we should go back and once 8 is cut, and say to Shigeki and Adutni, well, is it time to put it into 9, right? Like into head.
Yeah.
Because that's probably a good decision point. It's like, okay, is it ready? You know, we talked about it. We weren't comfortable doing it for 8, but okay, we're past 8. It's going to be the current. Should we put it in now to start baking for the next one?
Sounds good to me.
Yep. Okay.
So where would we have an issue here, or like try and discuss it in the security working group, or
Why don't we have an issue here, which is on our agenda as a reminder?
Well, 9's not an LTS, so that's not really gonna. There's already a PR out or an issue over in the main repo.
Yep.
So yeah. So maybe
I think
just
the only
comment
point was like going back and saying, should we actually say, is it time to land now?
I think this is the scope of the LTS group. I mean, this is we're
Yeah.
all really concerned about it just generally because all of us care, but so do a bunch of other people. So
So I think that one of the things, and maybe this should be brought up at the CTC, is I think that this problem in general is one that needs people like actively planning. So I'm not sure if it means another working group or what, but I just, again, a tangent. I think this should be brought up on Wednesday, and we should figure out, like how we want to proactively deal with this instead of just letting it sit in issues that are baking.
I tagged it CTC agenda.
Okay, awesome.
For this particular issue or that PR?
The actual PR,
Yeah. Okay.
just to bring it back into conversation, and I'll CC the LTS and CTC.
Oh, perfect. Thanks, Sam.
Cool. All right. So again, that's fine. That was discussed elsewhere. Let's move on. Backporting fixes, test fixes to maintenance branches. This is a bit of a late breaking issue. So I think Miles and James have already commented on the issue, but basically the question is, let's clarify what test fixes we would backport if we were to backport any into a maintenance release. Yeah, does anyone have any further opinions other than what was said in the issue?
Yeah, I guess I didn't comment there, but I'd be leaning towards like if it's actually bothering somebody and it's a test, the risk seems awfully low. So I'd probably favor pulling it back in.
So for what it's worth, in the current 4.8.3 maintenance release that's scheduled, there are currently there are 2 commits in there already that are fixing stuff in tests. So though generally they were larger surface areas. They were like literally things were broken in the test, not fixing a flake. So I have mixed feelings on this, and I'd love to hear other people's opinion. But the high level thought for me here is a concern about slippery slope on this. So with maintenance releases, our plan is like, right now there was like a whole bunch of like random edge cases that ended up coming in all around the same time. So I put together a 4.8.3 release, but generally we would not be doing maintenance releases. Now there's nothing stopping us, and this is something we had talked about before, from like when people make requests of backporting things to that release line, and then when enough of them come together, when we find some sort of bigger, thing that needs to be fixed, that we can bundle them all in. And that's kind of, what's happening right now. It's still not a ton of changes though. And so my only concern, especially since I've been doing a lot of the V4 testing and have not seen that particular test flake a whole bunch, is just like, where do we draw the line on what we land and what we don't? And like, I mean, arguably, if the high level thing that we're saying is that if people are willing to put in the time and backport things, and then someone's like, oh, well, I'm willing to put in, the 3 days that it takes to go through and audit everything and do a full release, then like, why aren't we just doing that? It just doesn't seem, to be setting a good precedent. And so, and like further back to this one particular test change, which I'm realizing, looking at the other test changes that are on there, this may be inconsistent, but it's mostly like, if someone else not from the core committee came in and asked for this test to be landed, we probably would not very likely land it. But because it's people from the LTS group, we're considering it. And I'm not really sure what kind of message that sends.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I wouldn't I would say we wouldn't consider if it was causing. If somebody came and said, "Hey, every time I run this, it fails in my CI."
But that's not what they're saying, right? They're saying we're sometimes seeing this being flaky. Not it's always.
Yeah, okay, all right, but equivalent. If it was like, here we have the fix, it's causing somebody grief. I don't think we'd say no necessarily. I mean, I would. My reaction would be no different anyway. But
So where I tend to go on it is if somebody's asking for it, then there's not a lot of harm.
right, that's what I'm thinking.
You just have to make sure that we're being consistent, and that deals with the issue, Miles, that you're saying that if it's coming, the request is coming from an LTS member versus anyone else, we should still handle them in a consistent way.
Yeah, I'm like, if somebody's actually asking for it and we can understand why, then I don't see why not, as long as, like a test, it's not a risk to the stability, right?
It shouldn't impact our release schedule. I mean, just like Miles was saying, that these things can just accumulate there in the staging until we're ready to actually do a release.
Sure.
Now the challenge here, though, to me, is, and this is pedantic, and I'll admit it, but like, where do we draw the line? Because when we're doing these releases, like, and we have 300 commits, generally of those 300 commits in a release, between 60 and 70 of them are tests, and arguably any one of those are ones that could improve things. And I don't think...
But we're not talking about could improve, we're talking about people actually asking for it. I guess that's the main difference, right? It's not just, well, there's a fix, so we'll put it in. It's like somebody actually wants it.
Mm-hmm.
So wait, what's the argument against not backporting tests? Is it just like ones that cause conflicts?
I think in this case, it's just work. And, once it's in maintenance, we've said we're not going to backport things unless, I think the wording says critical. But basically, we're not going to just automatically backport things. And we're discussing, well, what if somebody wants something backported?
Yeah, and that's the key difference between active LTS and maintenance LTS. The critical difference has always been in active is when we are proactively going off and backporting things. And then maintenance is just as steady state as possible, and only backporting things that are requested. It's how we handled 0.12 and 0.10. We weren't going out and proactively backporting anything. It was just as things were requested, we would go do them.
Right. Then that's the same thing in my mind, is that if nobody asks for it, we will not backport it unless it's like, okay, it's a critical security fix or it's something that we just have to fix. Otherwise, it's down to, if there's something that somebody has a fix for, it's causing them grief, then why we should be open to that.
So just to clarify, were we talking about any change?
Well, it comes down to risk as well, right? Like, it's also got to be low enough risk that we don't think it's going to cause,
No, yeah, I just meant like if it could be like any sort of change. So I thought we were talking about test changes for some reason.
Well, I think the ones in hand are test ones, which we
I think anybody can request something and say, hey, I believe this to be critical, but it takes maybe a little bit more judgment than somebody saying, I think it's critical. Like that's what the LTS working group is for, I guess.
Yeah, I think in this case, they're also saying this is important to me. And if it's critical, that's why we would, just do it proactively. But if it's somebody saying this is important to me, we as the LTS team look at it and say, well, we think the risk is acceptable, then.
So I'll push it a little further. If people come to us and say, hey, I'd like this change, it's a Semver minor, but it has not going to cause any problems and it has very low risk, should we be cutting Semver minors on an LTS maintenance release?
So in my personal opinion, I have no problem with cutting Semver minors on the maintenance per se, but they would have to come with one more piece of information. Not only is it low risk, but also it's high value. Like this is really good. Like it's really causing problems across the ecosystem that we can't consistently start debugging. This isn't a good example because it doesn't affect Port.x, but if somebody came to us and said, listen, we can't get Atom working across all our Node LTS because we need this extra little command line flag down in 4.x, and it was low risk and easy, I personally would be like, okay. So I thought the purpose of the main
we've made decisions like that before, and and we've agreed consistently to handle those on a case-by-case basis as those things come up. So I mean, it really comes down to understanding that case-by-case exceptions will happen. What is the general rule going to be?
So it seems to me like the general rule needs to be that that we need to change our maintenance plan to explicitly allow for people to request things to be backported to maintenance, and that it will be discussed and voted on by the LTS. And basically, the only thing that we need to be cognizant of is the workload that creates, and be willing to, adapt if we find that we're getting buried in requests, which I don't think will happen, but I think that we need to be cognizant that it may.
Yeah, I agree. I'd like to sort of touch on tests just a little bit more. So I think we probably want to backport any tests that are related to any fixes or features that go onto LTS branches.
Well, if we backport, you mean, so if we backport a fix, we need to bring the test along with it.
Yes, and possibly related tests. I'm not sure there's a huge value in backporting tests that aren't directly related to new fixes. However, I mean, so there's a bit of a worry. I mean, I would share this worry because it could happen at some point. That we could backport something that is necessary but fairly complex that essentially would break one of those tests that we then don't have. You see what I'm saying? And then we wouldn't know about it.
Right. I see what you're saying. Yeah.
I'm not sure.
But I think in
feasible, but
yeah, I think the risk that we're like, the reason we wouldn't just backport all sorts of new tests is that we're figuring the churn is low enough that we can take that risk.
Right.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, yeah, we want to only do work that in this phase that really needs to get done.
Right. Yeah. I mean, in that case, I think just we need to be careful that we are backporting tests that might be related to fixes that are coming.
Yeah, I think that should be part of it. If we backport a fix, like an actual functional change in the code, we should bring back whatever testing goes along with that. So I think, Miles, you're suggesting the main thing is that we need to add a little bit of wording to our doc?
Yeah, I think we need to add wording to the doc that's explicitly stating that non-critical changes can be considered to land with a general consensus of the LTS working group. I would like us to try to be able to do that consensus without needing a meeting.
Sure.
We should maybe be explicit about it not, excuse me, needing to happen in a meeting.
Yeah.
And in general, if everyone's on board, I'd almost argue that we can use the same lazy consensus model that we've got right now for the rest of the project for this.
Yeah.
Essentially, if multiple people from the LTS working group sign off within 72 hours and there's no objections, then it lands, and we'll then have a second chance to object to things landing when we put together release candidates.
Yeah, that sounds good. I'm happy to volunteer to add some wording around that line as a first cut.
Actually, I'm not totally clear on that. So Miles, I guess I'm wondering if I'm misunderstanding. So I think we might maybe just have different ideas of critical. So I think what I think Gibson and Michael are saying is that test failures or the test problems that cause flakiness in our builds are critical. But you're saying they're not, or maybe the definition of critical was used to be more like your data centers are burning down.
Yeah.
Yeah, critical does imply a high bar, I think.
And that's something for me too. I don't want us watering down what critical means, so that when we do releases due to critical bugs, I want us to be explicit about the fact that these are critical bugs, like you need to update today. I would argue that like the release of things that we have coming up for 4.8.3 is like we have a TLS socket handshake error problem. We have a module fix for loading from global folders for Windows, which I would argue that is critical. We have for TLS keeping track that streams are closed. We have some partial reverts for other stuff. Like basically everything that I've landed is like stuff that is explicitly breaking the experience, even though they might be edge cases. But I would only argue that maybe one of them are critical. So I wouldn't go as far as to say that like the test stuff is critical. And I also think, and maybe this could be part of the language, that like basically what I did is when I went and audited for V6, when I saw things and I was like, wow, that's a really bad bug. I wonder if that's on 4, and I tested and it was. I backported it to fix it because we may as well like fix really obvious bugs that are not just critical. So like perhaps we should have language in there that like, you know, anyone in the LTS working group or backporting working group can land non-critical changes to the staging branches, assuming that there is no objections from other members. Because I kind of just took that upon myself as I was going, and it was just, you know, why not fix it? Like, I think to the same argument that Gibson has for the tests, like, why not fix things that are arguably a problem? But where I drew the line was like stuff that is obviously breaking. We have tests to prove that it's obviously breaking, and it's breaking the experience that should be expected. So I don't think that we should be not landing things just because they're not critical.
I guess maybe what we could change the wording is that like routinely, you know, as part of the regular process, only critical things will be landed. But, you know, but I don't know the right wording off the top of my head, but basically, you know, but that doesn't mean that other things won't land if the fixes are available and people are asking for them.
Or we can even take it a step further and remove critical altogether, which may help solve this, and simply say fixes in maintenance mode will be landed as deemed appropriate by the LTS and backporting working group to improve the stability of a maintenance release. If you see anything that you think should be backported, please raise an issue and we will consider it. Right?
Yeah, like maybe that might be a way to go. Like we want to say that everything isn't just going to be backported.
Yeah, I think
it's more of a case. It's more of a pull model rather than just a flow-through model.
I think one of the things I would love to get across on this would be the idea that like we will continually be making our maintenance branches better as we see it for obvious things, but you should not expect the same amount of change in maintenance releases as you would in prior releases. And like basically, I would even argue it's like a higher level of our stability index, right? It's like,
yes,
if you're in maintenance mode, it is extremely stable. And the only things that should land are things that are 100% obviously fixing bugs, 100% not changing the performance profile, and 100% improving the release process. And
with the corresponding risk factor, you know, I think as Stan was saying, if there's something that's super high value, we might take a little more risk on one of those things.
But this is where I think that I maybe don't agree, is like, this is a maintenance release. In less than a year, this release is not even going to be maintained anymore. We have V6, and we'll have another release also. So my argument would be that, like, I almost want to push for no semver minors, to be completely honest, because if people want new features, we have other stable LTS branches that they can move to get it. and our support contract window is slowly dwindling.
Yeah, I'm generally in line with that, but I think Sam's example was if there was something that was causing so much grief in the ecosystem just because that one thing wasn't there, we would potentially but it would have to be so clearly valuable and important because it was causing grief, then we would consider it.
But I think the balance there is the grief because people are not updating to a more maintained release, right? And I'm not saying that we need to force people to update, but if we're less than a year away from this no longer being supported, are we actually doing people a favor by backporting this one thing that makes it easier for them to stay on that release? I mean, I'm not saying that we should be in the position of parents for people, but more so it seems to me that it's more of a Band-Aid than an actual solution to a problem.
Yeah, I'm generally of the same feeling that we don't want to do anything. I just think there's always some case where you might, but I don't know if we want to. The thing is, do we want to say in the docs that call those out specifically and say no, we're not going to do them?
Mm-hmm. So I think one really tangible example that we can talk about here, and maybe we can workshop it really quickly, unless people think we're getting tight for time, is Sam, you had a sem reminder that you had put on V4 for certificate-related stuff, right?
I think so, but honestly, I have such terrible memory.
Yeah, that was probably the certificate chain one, right?
Yeah, that was the one that you thought was an OpenSSL one, but actually wasn't. It was that docs thing.
Oh, okay. So actually, that's a case where there's this property in the crypto module called RSA_engine or something. Can't remember. It was documented as a property on the crypto module, but it wasn't actually there. But it was something that OpenSSL had. So I added a definition for it. So it's arguably, I would call it sem for minor. I mean, it's before the change lands, you cannot refer to that property, and after the change lands, you can. So pretty much the definition of sem for minor. But to be clear, I'm also not I think you asked me to backport it, Miles. I just was too slow or something. I would not make a request to the LTS working group to backport that.
Okay.
However, I landed that commit where I PR'd it because I was reviewing the code and I saw there was a deficiency. Now, if one of our customers or anybody, if anybody on earth was like, oh man, I'm working with v4.x, I'm following the docs, and I just can't get the engine to work, and it's really important to me, and I can't update to 6.x. They'd really have to make the case. They'd have to really make a case why they really need it, and I can't actually think off the top of my head why that case. It'd be really hard to make that case.
Yeah. So I guess what I can say from a high level is I'm all about not making any defined hard rules without we don't need to say we won't do things, right? And maybe what we can just do is make it clear the process that will follow in making the decisions when we decide to do something. And then let's just wait until a scenario comes, and then we can, if need be, iterate as we get there.
Because I think we're all on the same wavelength, to be honest.
Yep. I'm good with that. If we define the process by which the decision was made, then at least it's traceable. And then if people are, for some reason are like, we want more in or we want less in or whatever. And I take your point, Miles, that given that it's been around for a year, if Node 4 had been burning through people's hands, they would have mentioned it already. So the idea that we need to add extra things to it in the next year is a difficult thing to claim.
Mm-hmm. I also think that we can act proactively to avoid this by doing essentially what we did in this last one, which is planning a minor right before maintenance and making sure that we audit and get the things in that people are requesting. And maybe a few things just miss it, but that's always going to be the case, right? When you make a line in the sand, things end up on the other side eventually.
Yep. So if we just we have now about what things we backport, and then just add a thing saying exceptions may be made on a case-by-case basis based on LTS review or something similar. and then we just agree that we're not likely to take things unless there's a real need. That'd be fine. I mean, if we were going to say no to this fix, to be honest, it's not the end of the world. Yes, it's an annoyance, but the reason I put it up was more just because 4.8.3 hadn't gone out yet, and I thought if it's happening, like if it's going to go into an existing release, maybe not such a big deal. Obviously, if 4.8.3 goes out and it's not in that, there's no point in saying, well, we should have a 4.8.4 just for this. And, yeah, it was more just a question of if we're already doing the release, like an opportunistic, maybe just put something in. But anyway.
No, Gibson, I mean, my gut is that like we can land it in 4.8.3, and I'll go ahead and do that. I apologize if I came off as a little grumpy. I have been this week, so.
No, I mean, it's definitely good. It's good to have the discussion. I mean, because it's coming up elsewhere. Like, what do we backport to maintenance? We need to be clear on it. And even if it's not like a hard and fast rule, it's just this is what tends to happen. That's still good for everyone to be clear on, right? So, yeah. And hey, I just thought, maybe one day it'll fail and it'll annoy someone when they're trying to get a full build out. That's kind of the main reason to do it, right?
Totally.
Yeah, anyway. Cool. All right. So I think if we add that sentence or add something along those lines,
I'll volunteer to take a first cut at adding something.
Basically, yeah, we might make exceptions because that's kind of already true, right? We always can make exceptions. If someone comes and says we need to update npm because of X, Y, Z reason, then we might well do it. Yeah. Cool. All right. So should we move on to the next one? Okay. So next one is the inspector debug break issue, which is a Node issue. So the backstory on this one is that obviously when we moved over to the inspector in Node 6, the debug break option, which basically puts a breakpoint on the first line and also starts the debugger, was used to do that breakpoint for both inspect and debug. So if you do in Node 6, if you do node debug break, it will start the old debugger. And if you do inspect debug break, it will start the new one. This was then removed. Debug break, the flag was removed from Node 7 when we removed debug. So the question is, and someone asked that we add it back, basically. And the question is whether we should and what to do about all this, given that the whole debugger deprecation thing was kind of an anomaly caused by V8 drop-in support for it. Any thoughts?
So in terms of actually adding it back, what kind of work does that take?
It's pretty simple. It's just an alias for inspect break, basically. It's an alias for an existing option. I think Sam said it was pretty simple.
Yeah, it's like it's a single string comp. Basically, the case statement, the conditional statement that says inspect if the option is -- inspect break. You just make it say if the option is -- inspect break or is -- debug break, then enable the break behavior, which is basically what the code used to do. So I think this is my PR, right? Not my issue. I didn't.
There's a couple. There's a follow-up issue I can post in the chat where summarize things.
I put an issue. I think the issue and the PR are linked from here, and there's also another PR somewhere else, which is Sam's.
Yeah, and Raphael talked about it. So my thinking is that the tools vendor like Adam and Visual Tools said this is painful for us. We actually, or it's painful for us that we don't have a consistent across the supported Node versions way of starting the inspector and breaking on the first line. And we can't really change the previous patch versions. We can tell everybody, listen, that you should be on the head of your majors, but that seems a little strict. Anyhow, my feeling is it's a very, very easy thing to do. It makes it easier for our tools users, and we can delete the code, all like 15 characters of it, in a year and a half when the 6.0 out of support. So that's why I put it in. I don't have any personal stake in the game as not a user of either of these tools, but that's
I think, well, for me at least, I mean, if you go to the absolute basic, if you do node -- debug break at the moment across every version of Node except 7, obviously now because it's being removed, you always get a debugger. Okay, you get the inspector. You might get the inspector in a later version, but if you just want to tell someone one flag to pass, to get a basic debugger, then it always works. And I don't really see a good reason to remove it. On the other hand, we would also want to backport the new flag, right? So into 6, and that means that when 4 goes out of support, then inspect break will work across every version of Node, and it's just easy. And it's like, use this flag, okay, and now use this flag when you change to the next version. Yeah, and of course, if we were going to do that, we'd want to, if we added debug break back in, we probably want to say it was deprecated, so we could then remove it in Node 9 or 10, whichever.
So one thing that I think is worth bringing up was RevHack had followed up with some of the vendors as to like what their thought process on it was. Since 6 is going to have versions with and without this flag, it honestly doesn't make a difference for them. They're going to have the same code in there to like check for it no matter what. To me, I guess like as long as we have a branch, a release branch that at some point had the wrong flag, they're going to have to support it. So to me, it makes sense bringing the flag back to 8 with a deprecation notice in 8 for that flag. And then just moving forward and not backporting anything. That's at least like my gut on what is the simplest solution forward. It still gives us, another 2 years until we can actually deprecate it, but I don't really see any benefit in moving back. I guess like the other flag and being able to have consistent tooling across the 2 is reasonable. And like it's not the end of the world to backport it. I just don't think it's like, necessarily the solution if we're thinking about vendors. Also, do we fully support all of it? Because I know that there's actually like a pretty big delta between the V6 and the V7/V8 version of the inspector.
No.
I have no idea. I assume they're dealing with that somehow. But I
mean, I haven't personally noticed in using the inspector on Node 6 any issues, but then you wouldn't, right? I assume that the delta's in like edge cases and handling source maps and whatever else, like more advanced stuff.
Maybe we need to basically go back to the people who've asked for this and get more feedback from them, basically what the pain involved is for them and what they'd like to see. But I think they were, I don't know.
Yeah, it's kind of, we could go either way, right? It's not a big deal. I think we should definitely backport inspect break so that works, because there's kind of no downside to that. That's what we should be using going forward. And the question is, do we keep debug break in 7 and 8? I guess
yes. Oh wait, I mean 7, yeah, because like why get rid of it in 7?
Well, the thing is, we already did, so we'd have to like actively bring it back.
Like we actually got rid of it in 7, so that was a breaking change. But we did that because we were.
Is that not the case? Oh, maybe
I don't think we broke it in 7. I think it's just an 8.
No, that must just be an 8.
Oh, okay, yeah, no. So I'm probably just getting confused with this.
No,
Sorry.
No. What happened was that in 7.6.0 you added inspect break.
Yes.
So after 7.6.0 you can use inspect break, and that includes 8. But in 8 you can't use -- debug break because it's gone. And before 7.6.0, you can't use -- inspect break because it doesn't exist. So you're kind of, it's kind of like it's like the before 7.6.0 and the after 7.6.0 for ORAL, which is kind of annoying.
So considering the fact that we aliased debug to make it easier, it makes sense that we would alias inspect debug break in the exact same way. Like we already made that decision. So that seems kind of like clear to me. I think it's more a question of like whether or not there's anything to gain by backporting inspect break to 6.
Well, I mean, it is slightly easier, I guess, because if you do debug break without the inspect in 6, you get the you get the old debugger, not the inspector, right? Whereas if you do inspect break, then you get the inspector. I'm not sure how big a deal that is, but it's like one less option to pass when you're debugging, right?
Mm-hmm. No, but if you inspect with debug break, doesn't it work the way that's expected?
Yes. So if you do node inspect debug break, you get the inspector. If you do node debug break, you get the old debugger. And so the only gain you get would be like one less option, right?
Mm-hmm.
I guess why wouldn't you backport to 6?
Actually, no, I'm kind of with Raphael on this. As I think about it more, I think debug break actually should, like, I don't think there should be an inspect break. I think that actually doesn't make sense. It's like you do -- inspect or -- debug to choose your protocol. But, you know, and they both exist. And then when you want break on first line behavior, you provide a CLI option for that. And we didn't call it -- break because that's pretty obscure. So it's -- debug break, whatever your debugger is.
We probably just misnamed both of those flags. It should be just break on first line.
That would be nice, yeah. But
So I guess the issue is then if you use debug break, it's which protocol it used would change. But yeah,
that's
I mean,
with debug, as Miles just pointed out.
okay, so if we then, I guess the other question is, if we're going to remove inspect break, does that need a deprecation cycle and etc.?
Probably suck.
Yeah, I mean I agree. That's Raphael's point. It seems reasonable. It's not unreasonable anyway. Except I guess if you're used to the debug and inspect difference, and you've already worked out that inspect break is the inspector and debug break is the debugger, like it's inspect plus break, and the other one's debug plus break, then if you now say that debug break runs the inspector, that might be confusing.
So if I can make a suggestion,
yep.
It seems like we're uncovering the kernel of this problem, which is a little bit larger than the scope of LTS, which is just the problem with how we're handling break in general and the language that we have around it. I think that it may make sense to punt this to a new issue where we explicitly decide what we want to do for the future based on what is the best thing to do for the future, and then appropriately backport what is necessary in order to make the path to the future as easy as possible. I think that we should optimize for a consistent and good user experience with Node moving forward, and then just try to stabilize so that the LTS branches are easier to support for vendors.
Seems good as a principle. Should we backport anything?
Well, I guess the suggestion was figure out what should we do, because it seems like after the discussion, it's not necessarily 100% clear what we should do going forward. Once we figure that out, then backport it if it makes sense to have.
Yeah, if we're going forward
across the releases.
If we're going forward with inspect break, we backport, and if we're not, we're just saying like debug breakers, we'll just use that going forward. Then we don't, right? Then it makes no sense to backport something that's deprecated.
Okay, so kick it back into the master to talk about.
And I guess it's going to be it's a bit of a bike shed issue at that point, right? It's like, what name do you give it?
So I would say I think the best thing that we can do is we have this issue 12364 on Node. We could punt it back to there, or we could start a new meta issue to kind of like wrap up everything that was thought of in that issue, and then like, you know, have a place that's just the explicit discussion. I don't know what the better way of doing that is.
I guess maybe a new issue would be clearer.
Yeah, so I think that Refhack is listening right now because I've seen him chime in on some issues. If you are, we should start a new meta issue. If not, I'll post a comment into this, just being explicit about what we want to do as a follow-up here. I'll take that action item.
So you'll start the issue, or you're saying if Refhack doesn't, you'll comment?
I'm going to comment inside of 12364.
Right.
Explicitly stating what we'd like to do moving forward and requesting that a new meta issue is opened, summarizing where we're at right now and what we can do to move forward.
Okay.
Miles, I don't know if we need. Are you sure we need a new issue? I mean, there was the original bug report. Maybe we should continue to use that. Do you really want to do one?
Continue to use the original bug report if you want. My only concern is that there's 23 comments in there, and the initial issue is not opened by a collaborator, so it's not as easy for us to just like go in and edit the top comment. So you kind of have to dig through.
Yeah, I think
to find-
if a new comment started with just here's an overview of everything, and like it's probably going to come down to a sort of almost a vote, just what do people think is best. That might be clearer, just linked to the old one.
Okay, I'm good with that. No problem.
And it sounds like Raphael's already on it, so
Oh yeah.
yeah, he's pretty quick off the bat. Right, cool. So
Can you just refer to the new issue and the old issue and
old issue, yeah.
and then just close the old issue referring to the new one.
Cool. All right. So we've got 4 minutes left. So I guess we should. I was thinking the ideal thing might be to say, right, let's work out what we're going to do with. If we can work out a quick plan for how we want to triage things, then we might even be able to look at some of these things offline and just try that asynchronous backport review process. Depending what you guys think. So basically, issue 204, just a plan for what we'd actually do if we're triaging some minor backports. Some of this ties into what Sam was saying about wanting to be able to look at a PR and know what this sort of status is. And I think we now have enough labels that everything can always have a clear state for what the LTS working group think it should be done with it, even if that is just we're going to look at it again later because it may need some more time to bake. And yeah, so any feedback on the proposed labeling scheme?
I've had trouble finding the labeling scheme, actually.
What do you mean?
I mean, I know Anna was going to document it, but I just finding the definition of labels.
If you look at the issue I raised in LTS, I linked to Anna's issue in there, Anna's PR, and that documents all the labels that we were going to add, right? 1, 2, 4, 3, 1.
I'm having trouble with looking at it. Okay. Okay.
But I guess James's comment was in the past we've only ever backported some of our minors if people asked for them.
That's not entirely true. So the last round of Semver miners that we did, I explicitly went through and audited all the Semver miners that had not landed, and I made a list, which we then discussed in the LTS working group.
Okay.
So I guess the question is, I mean, so to tie into this, if we look at the next, come to the next issue at the same time, which is the potential Semver minor backports. Obviously, I haven't done this before, so I just ran branch diff and put everything in, and there's quite a lot of stuff to look at going down the list. Obviously, some of it repeats, right? You got 3 libuv patch updates, so we could probably decide on them, hopefully together, like as one thing. But if you're going to go through all this, I can see this taking quite a while.
So, for what it's worth, there are a lot here, but like I went through and did a personal audit on them before presenting to the LTS working group, and that substantially drew them back, like quite a bit. So like the ones in here that I see that are definitely worth considering are like the upgrade to libuv is something that we definitely need to discuss, and then that comes with a whole bunch of stuff. I already see some that are like definitely don't need to land, like this depths backport update to 5.5. That doesn't need to land on 6 or 7. That doesn't need to land. Cherry pick Clang ice change, ensure ABI compatibility, add node inspect 110.2. Like again, like we don't have the command line inspector, and we're missing parts of like. I bet you if we went through this and actually audited them, this list would be half the size easily. And that's just on like obvious ones. And I bet it would be a quarter of the size by the time we just put a little bit of thought in it. And by the time we voted on it, they'll maybe be 4 or 5.
Okay, so maybe the way to take it then is to have one person, obviously it's kind of been you previously, just go through them, get rid of the other ones, put the right labels on, right, put the do not lands on, maybe a comment just to say I'm doing this, and if anyone else in the LTS working group thinks I'm making a mistake, or anyone, let me know and we can reconsider. Then just trim it right down.
So the high level way in which I did it before is I made a gist of all of them, and I maintained that gist of all of them even after I went through the labeling.
Right.
I went through and labeled things as I saw appropriate, which then minimized the list. I then prepared an issue to the CTC, which stated all the ones that I thought were worth doing, and included a link to the original gist so people could review the ones that were not included in case they were interested in discussing them.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, that seems reasonable. So I guess actions next time I can just go through them. Does anyone? So speaking of labels, I mean, obviously, do not land for stuff we don't want to land is pretty simple, right? And the leave as is for stuff that we haven't decided on. So I guess that's all pretty straightforward. All right. So I guess the action for next time, I can go through this list and cut it right down.
Yeah, and Gibson, if you want to pair on this one, let me know.
Okay.
And I can even just like literally sit and be quiet, and then like you can just like literally ask me thoughts when you're
Sure.
like
Just ping them at you. Yeah, I suspect I could probably do, as you said, half of them first, and then if I have some that I'm not sure about, I can come and ask you, and you can say, this isn't supported or this doesn't exist. Okay. From that list, the only one I would want to discuss this time is the top one, OpenSSL Conf, just because we were going to discuss it last time, but we missed the meeting, and I would like to get that in the next. That's been sitting there for a couple of months now. And that is definitely one we do, like, I know Sam and Michael and I are quite keen to go back.
Yeah, has that one been backported yet?
Yeah,
I mean, is there a PR open?
7, but not a backport to 6. So if you go and actually look at the pull requests that are labeled for V6, we have about 4, arguably 5 if you include inspect break, but we have 4 that are, OpenSSL Conf is one of them. Support OpenSSL Conf again, the use system CAs instead of using bundled ones. There's a revert V8 Semver minor change, and a backport -- after -e as end of options. So it's in there already as a pull request, as a heads up.
It is. Okay, cool. So you have the number for that?
Yes, the one you're looking for is number 11583.
yeah, and it's about target 6.x.
Okay, so I don't know how it normally works. Do you just say, does anyone have any issues, or do you have a vote, or?
It has LTS agenda on it. So like basically all the Semver miners should have LTS agenda on it, and when we're ready to like it's kind of a mixed bag, right? Because people can go and open backports if they want to before we voted on it, but generally like it's not necessarily the best use of effort if we haven't voted on it yet.
Sure.
So we should just have the large meta issue that tracks them all, including the ones that already have PRs, and all the ones that have PRs have LTS agenda on them right now.
Okay. Cool. So specifically for this one then, does anyone object to backporting it?
I don't object, but I do think that we should do them all at once, to be completely honest. And I'll put together a schedule this week. I know I keep saying that, but I will. That includes an explicit date for when we'll plan the minor, and we can.
Okay.
Sure
I mean, as long as we do it before the next minor, I guess there's no rush.
Yeah.
Just don't want to let it slip again, and because obviously if it's 2 months between minors, that starts to add up.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so going forward, I guess I will. I'll have a go through the list with Miles and prepare something for the next meeting, and we'll make sure that that's in time for the next minor. Does that sound good?
Sounds good to me.
Yep.
Yep, sounds good.
When is the next meeting? Is it going to be in 3 weeks or?
Yeah, it's every 3 weeks.
Cool. Okay. So, given no objections, I think that's all of our agenda for today, with the exception of any questions. I don't think I've seen any questions in the issue. Is anyone on then on ISE to see if there've been any comments there.
Just Refax comment, and I pasted it into the VM.
Which
You paste it into the issue or into the chat for the Hangout?
It's I pasted it into the Google Doc.
oh, of course, the minutes.
Okay, I tagged it for CTC review.
Cool. Yeah, I think we covered the inspect break thing.
So there were no other comments in IRC if that's what we're waiting for.
Okay, cool. And then I think we're done. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, great. Talk to you guys later.
Cheers.
Bye, y'all. Take care.